Plans are part of a broad strategy set out by the Home Secretary Theresa May earlier this year. She joins us now from our central London studio. Home Secretary, thanks very much for joining us this morning. This bill to be announced by the Prime Minister includes measures to stop people inciting hatred and undermining democracy. It's all a question of definition, isn't it? How do you define extremism? How do you define hatred? That'll be something that'll be tested in the courts.
Well, of course, the legislation will have to be drafted very carefully and there will be proper parliamentary debate about that. But underlying this is the fundamental principle that we live in a great country, we have pluralistic values in this country, a pluralistic society, but there are those, sadly, who are seeking to divide us, who are seeking to promote hatred, to promote intolerance, and seeking to reject the values that we share, values of democracy, law and order, tolerance, acceptance of different faiths, and that is the extremism that we have to deal with, and we will be dealing in the counter-extremism bill and the wider strategy that we will introduce with extremism of all forms. Yes, the Islamist extremism, but also neo-Nazism.
Yeah, the difficulty is, though, that a law designed for today's needs, so to speak, may be very loosely enforced under a future government, not necessarily yours, where the state will suddenly decide, actually, we don't like the look of your group, so we're going to shut you down and shut down the premises in which you operate, simply because we don't like what you're saying. You're extremist, so you can't have it anymore.
No, that's not what this is about, and I think most people will recognise that actually we do need to ensure that we are promoting the values that bring us together as a society, the values that make us the great country to live in, those British values of democracy, of law and order, of tolerance. We have a right, everybody has a right in this country to live how they choose to live, but that right bears with it a responsibility of accepting other people's right to live how they choose to live as well. And there are those who are seeking to divide us, who are seeking to preach that hatred and intolerance, and who are actively seeking, through extremism, to undermine those values that unite us as a society. And we need to ensure, and this is about the legislation, but it's also about a wider strategy which is working with communities, which is being very positive about the values that we share and promoting those. That's
an interesting point about working with communities, because surely one of the issues is stopping young people being drawn into extremism in the first place. Labour suggesting, in fact, your government cut back on community-led work to stop extremism at its grassroots.
No, what we did when we first came into government in 2010 was we changed the way the programme that was operating, the Prevent programme, the way that it looked at these issues of extremism, so that it didn't just look at violent extremism, it did look at non-violent extremism. Now, having looked at that for some time, I think it is right that we have this wider strategy to counter extremism, because extremism it is seeking to divide us, but it can, of course, poison young minds. We can see people being radicalised, and that taking them through to perhaps taking action, perhaps going to a terrorist training camp, perhaps going to Syria, taking part in fighting, and perhaps returning, or just staying here in the UK, but the radicalisation leading people to want to actively take violence against others.
Let me talk to you about migrants in the Mediterranean for a moment. You've written in the Times this morning, the present situation in the Mediterranean is intolerable, demanding a clear response from European nations. You've said you disagree with the suggestion from the EU that no migrants intercepted at sea should be sent back against their will. Are you saying, in effect, that they should be forcibly repatriated?
Well, what underlies most of the traffic that we see coming in, of human beings that we see coming across the central Mediterranean, and of course we are taking part in the search and rescue. The Royal Navy ship HMS Bulwark is there, we have Border Force cutters there, seeking helicopters, helping to rescue people who otherwise might be dying in the Mediterranean. But what lies behind this traffic is a criminal trade in human beings. There are criminal gangs who are taking people's money, they're being transported across Africa, putting them into boats that they know, vessels they know are going not going to work. And one of the things we need to do is to deal with that traffic.
Right.
And part of that is for people to know that people will be returned to Africa, so that they won't necessarily get to Europe just as a result of paying these criminal gangs.
Okay, let's be absolutely clear about this then. Are you saying that people who've crossed the Mediterranean from North Africa under very difficult and dangerous circumstances, once they reach dry land somewhere in Europe, they should all be sent back again to where they came from? Is that what you're saying?
what we're talking about, of course, what we need to look at very carefully is people who are refugees. Most of the refugees from Syria, of course, will be coming through a different route, not across this central Mediterranean route. But it isn't just a question of taking people to Europe and then returning them. I think we do need to look at the possibility of, when people are rescued from the Mediterranean, being able to return them to Africa rather than them necessarily being brought to Europe.
So there's a wide
range of actions that we need to take.
But it's a really this is a really crucial point, Home Secretary, if I may. You seem to be saying that people who are crossing the Mediterranean, thousands of them, having risked their lives, would be sent back, in your view, should be sent back in your view.
What I'm saying is that there is a terrible trade in human beings that is taking place. Criminals are profiting from this trade. We need to deal with that trade. We need to deal with those criminals. There are a number of ways of doing that. Part of it is actually finding out about the criminal gangs and being able to interdict the criminal gangs. And we are putting our expertise from our National Crime Agency into work with Europol to be able to do that. So that is part of what we need to do. But we also need to ensure that the criminals aren't able simply to take people's money, to put them into vessels that could lead to them losing their lives on the basis that they are going to reach Europe. And I think it is right that those who are not refugees, that those who are economic migrants, that we do ensure that people who don't have a right to be coming to Europe actually are being returned to Africa.
Theresa May, Home Secretary, thanks very much.
Yes, Secretary, are there? Good morning to you. If I can start firstly with the question of migrants and your piece in the Times this morning, you speak of migrants being forcibly returned. That sounds quite brutal.
No, what we're talking about, I think it's important to look at the traffic that we see in terms of this trade in human beings across the Mediterranean. Because what we see is that a lot of people coming are economic migrants, but they are people who are paying criminal gangs, paying criminals to transport them across Africa. These criminals are then putting them into vessels which they know very often are not seaworthy, where people's lives will be put at risk. And of course, we as the United Kingdom are participating in the search and rescue operation to make sure that people are not dying at sea. But we need to deal with these criminal gangs. We need to deal with this terrible, callous trade in human beings. And partly that is about the expertise that can help to interdict the criminals and deal with them. And our National Crime Agency is working with Europol. We're offering that expertise as well. But also I think it's important that the criminals aren't able simply to say to people, if you pay us money, we are going to put your lives at risk, but don't worry, you will get to Europe. And that's why it's important that people picked up in the Mediterranean can be taken back to Africa.
But do you agree, if you use the term forcibly removed, that it does imply that these people who've endured all manner of difficulties actually trying to get to some safety, that you're then going to put them further into difficulties in terms of forcibly returning them to their countries that they're fleeing from?
Well, first of all, I don't think that's a phrase that I myself have used, but what I did say was that the High Representative, the European High Representative, Federica Mogherini, had said that effectively that nobody should be returned against their will, and therefore effectively that Europe should accept anybody who wishes to come to Europe. And I think, as I say, what we're seeing lying behind a lot of these people trying to come to Europe is this terrible trade in human beings. There are criminals who are making money, making a profit out of people's aspirations, and doing so in a way where they know these people's lives will be put at risk. I think that is a terrible trade. I think we need to deal with that, and I think we need to ensure that the criminals are not able to ply this business any longer.
But why is it, do you think, that you see it so differently to the rest of Europe in terms of number of refugees? We're fifth behind Germany and France. They see that it is a good idea to accept quotas and everybody take their fair share. Why are you differing to such an extent?
Well, we think that whether or not the number of people that a country takes should be a matter for that individual country. We've said that consistently over the last 5 years. I've been saying that consistently over the last 5 years. The Prime Minister has been saying it consistently. And of course, as a country, we do, as you say, we're one of the countries that accepts the largest number of asylum seekers as regards countries in the European Union. So we do accept people who have that genuine need to seek asylum. We have a very proud heritage in the UK of providing that safe haven for people, of accepting people who are genuine refugees. But as I say, what we're seeing from a lot of the cases of people coming across the Mediterranean, and the top countries for people coming across the central Mediterranean are countries like Eritrea, like Nigeria, Somalia. What lies behind this is these criminal actions, these criminals who are profiting out of this business, and I think we need to deal with that.
You speak of an active programme of return. That presumably would cost. Why couldn't the money be used in relocating people who are genuine asylum seekers?
Well, of course there is a need to look at those people who are genuine asylum seekers, who are genuine refugees. But again, there are other actions that can be taken. If you look at people from Syria, for example, there are several million people from Syria who are now refugees in other countries, in countries bordering Syria. The United Kingdom has a very good record here. I think we can be proud of the fact that we are the second biggest bilateral donor in relation to the Syrian refugees. £800 million has been given by the UK. As a result of that, there are people, refugees from Syria, who have received medical treatment, who have water to drink, who have food to eat, who have shelters to live in, that have been provided by the UK government. That's an important contribution, and I think that's the most important way of helping to support those refugees from Syria.
Also on the agenda today, Home Secretary, this extremism disruption order. It's already illegal to incite violence in this country. What difference will it make?
Well, I think it will make a real difference. We need to deal with the extremists who are trying to divide us. They're seeking to promote hatred and intolerance, seeking to undermine the very values that make us the country we are, that make us the great country to live in, those pluralistic values that we have in our society. And our values of democracy, rule of law and order, tolerance of different faiths. It's great to live in a country where people have a right to live how they choose to live, but that brings with it a responsibility to accept others' rights to live how they choose to live. And what we're talking about in the counter-extremism strategy has a new bill, a new piece of legislation, which will introduce new orders to ban extremist groups, will bring in closure orders enabling us to deal with premises where there is this regular promotion of these extremist values. And remember, this extremism can lead to radicalisation of young people, can lead to the poisoning of people's minds, such that can then, of course, lead to violence.
And that could possibly go as far as closing mosques, people's place of worship.
Well, we need to obviously have very carefully drafted legislation in relation to the closure orders. But I think what we're talking about is where premises are being used regularly, consistently, for promoting extremist values, for trying to undermine our society, undermine the values that we share here in the United Kingdom, then it is important that we're able to take action on those premises. But the bill will be part of a wider strategy. It will include within it, for example, a programme in helping isolated communities. So there will be other parts of this strategy too, and also a very positive promotion of our British values. I think many people feel that we share great values in this country, but we often don't talk about it enough. We don't promote those values enough, and I think it's important that we do.
Very quickly, Home Secretary, any contradiction between the notion of standing up for free speech, as you say, and promoting the values that you're suggesting?
No, there isn't. Free speech is one of those values that underlies our society as well. It's one of the important values that we share and that we want to protect. What we're talking about here is not about undermining free speech. It's about those people who are preaching, who are promoting hatred and intolerance, who are seeking to divide us as a society, and who are seeking to undermine values like the freedom of speech and undermine our democracy and our law and order.
Home Secretary, thank you.